Mario Cuomo. He was the longest-serving Democratic governor in New York history. For more than a decade, he was one of the most eloquent and high-profile politicians, not just in New York, but in the entire country. Often remembered for, among other things, his indecision over whether or not to run for president, a new book argues that Cuomo's greatest legacy was his role in keeping the embers of progressive politics alive in the age of Ronald Reagan. A new book titled American Cicero, Mario Cuomo and the Defense of American Liberalism, traces Cuomo's beginnings in Queens to his rise in New York politics to his final days in Albany, when he was voted out of office as part of a nationwide Republican wave. I'm now joined by the author of that book, Professor Saladin Ambar. Professor, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you, as an academic, have been involved deeply in the notion of governors and their roles and their backgrounds and their characters. What brought your attention then to Mario Cuomo?
Well, my first book was about the progressive tradition in New York and New Jersey and how that brand of progressivism really helped change the direction of the country in the first half of the 20th century. And it occurred to me that there really ought to be a look, an examination of a singular kind of governor who was part of that tradition. And growing up in New York City in the 70s and 80s, it was really a no-brainer for me to be drawn to the legacy of Mario Cuomo, to see how he fit within that Hudson progressive tradition of moving politics in a liberal sort of way. And it was just intriguing to see him attempt this at the height of Reagan's popularity.
When you look at the title of your book, American Cicero, and folks will realize that the reference is to the great Roman orator Cicero. And we talked in the introduction about how eloquent and how persuasive Governor Mario Cuomo was. I'm sure there's some folks who are watching this and listening to our conversation right now, and they might not remember. It might be too young. How would you characterize then that eloquence, that speaking style of Mario Cuomo?
Wow, in many ways, it's like no other. Cuomo was trained as a lawyer. He also was a real student of theology and philosophy. So he brought that sort of lawyerly, philosophical elan to his speaking style. But he also was very working class. He was from an outer borough. He could relate to not being an elite, not being allowed to practice law in the more elite law firms in New York City in the 50s and 60s because he was an Italian American. So he had this sort of outsider, working class attitude coupled with this very philosophical bent. And I think it allowed him to convey complex ideas in very simple ways and also get at people's hearts. He was no Adlai Stevenson, who was a brilliant thinker and very sophisticated, but who failed in many ways, frankly, as progressives have often done in the past, to reach sort of the masses. Cuomo could reach people's heart as well as their mind. And I think that made him particularly effective as a speaker.
That question, whether he would in fact run for president, Hamlet-like, is this, should I run, should I not run? Tell us a little bit about what he was wrestling with, and then why ultimately he decided no to a run.
Sure. Well, for someone like Cuomo, I think the timing, even though it was always an issue for him, never could be quite right. And I think in part because there was a certain apprehension he had towards political power, towards ambition. There's that famous line in the Federalist Papers about ambition needing to counteract ambition, and we need that in government. Well, Cuomo counteracted his own ambition. The Vincentians at St. John's, both in the prep school and in the law school, trained him to be mindful and skeptical about the desire for power. And I think his father's own life, as someone who was working essentially a 24-hour life, cautioned him against doing more than what was necessary for your family and for your own well-being. There was a kind of fear, I think, he had towards political power and ambition, what he called chictamonia, ceremony, pomp and circumstance. And I think yet he desired it. And knowing that he desired it in some ways made him even more skeptical of it. So I think it was a complicated vision he had for where he stood in life. And governor of New York, I think, was the position that best represented his own kind of best self-image. To want or desire more than that, I have come to feel in my research, was something that made him deeply uncomfortable.
Last quick question for you here. How would Mario Cuomo, his brand of politics and his brand of being a politician, play today, do you think?
Oh, I think it would play well. I think, frankly, part of my inspiration and desire in writing the book was to encourage Democrats to seek what Mario Cuomo had, which was, yes, the Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren style brand of liberalism, but also someone that could get in the streets and talk to African Americans, talk to Latinos, talk to working class people in ways that spoke to their struggle. Cuomo did not abandon the idea of identity politics. He spoke very frankly and forthrightly to both whites and African Americans and others about the need for social and racial justice. But what he was able to do was do so in a way that spoke to not the fears, but the deepest passions and aspirations of the white working class and others. And it was that mixture of this working class sensibility, a old Catholic style, Vincentian style sense of social justice that goes all the way back to the social gospel movement of the early 20th century. All of those things gave him heart and brain power to speak to today's issues. And I think Democrats are still in many ways searching for that kind of combination.
Well, American Cicero indeed. This is a compelling look at a compelling figure, as we said in the beginning, not just a New York figure, but a national figure. Professor Salehin Amar, thank you so much for spending some time and talking with us. We appreciate it.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.